satiated with your food and dinner, because I feel like that makes it a nice, easy audience. You're nice and relaxed. We are both just so pleased to be able to spend this weekend with all of you.
By the way, I know some of you have teenage children, so I should clarify, I'm not texting if I'm looking at my phone.
These are the notes.
That's just where we have our notes. I feel like I keep saying this, but I mean it. I'm so grateful for all of you being here. As I've mentioned by now, as you know, I'm GCN's Director of Operations. David is a fiction writer. And on our free time, we write about same-sex relationships and marriage, Christian marriage, on our blog, Modern Kinship.
As you learned from Kim's story, neither of us loves being in the spotlight. We don't do a ton of public speaking, but we jumped at the opportunity to come up here tonight for one reason, really. We just wanted to give you the opportunity to show you what Christ-centered same-sex relationship looks like. For a lot of you, you may not be in communities or areas where you get to see a lot of it happening, where you get to see couples living it out. So that was really our impetus for coming up here tonight, to just be one visible example of that. So that's it. Here it is. Ta-da! And now, no.
Can we leave it?
Yeah, we can. I still got more. And seeing us up here tonight, it may be encouraging for some of you, may make you excited for your child. For some of you, it may make you nervous. For some of you, it may be downright terrifying to see this. And that's okay. You're welcome no matter where you're at. One more thing we wanted to recognize is that there are a diversity of relationships here in regard to parent-child. Some of you are in close relationship with your kids. Some of you may have strained relationships. Some of you may have kids who are not walking in the faith, and some who are. Some of you have children who are living, and some who are not. And we just appreciate all of you, and we welcome all of you here. Some of your children may be going on this journey of romance, wherever that may lead, and some of your children may be choosing a life of celibacy. And we also honor that too. All of you are welcome. There is space enough at God's table for all of us. Now it's your turn.
Well, we're both storytellers. We both have backgrounds in journalism. So we thought what we would do tonight would be just share parts of our stories. And since this is a parents' retreat, we thought we would share particularly about those parts of our stories that have to do with our parents and our families.
Yeah, so we wanted to start out with the coming out process and the coming out to our parents, because everyone loves a good coming out story. They're always just hilarious and uplifting, right? Not so much. For me, my coming out story is intimately tied into the first car I ever drove, which was a 1995 bright red Dodge Neon. It was a piece of crap car, but I just have this memory burned in my mind. Sitting in the car, my hands like white knuckling around the steering wheel in my parents' driveway for the better part of an hour, trying to bring up the nerve and courage to get out and go inside and have a talk with them, to have the talk with them. And I'm sure many of you have been on the receiving end of the talk. I was 19 and a freshman in college, and I had written my parents an email, because everyone was emailing by then, and that was the easiest way to do it. But they called me up and said, "Why don't you come home and we'll talk about this?" So I finally got the nerve to get out of that car, to go inside and have that talk. At 19, I felt like there was so much life ahead of me and so much possibility. And yet at the same time, I felt like this was the end. Going inside and having this talk was like I could die. It was so close to just that feeling. But I did go inside and I did have that talk. We all just cried and cried. And something in our family broke that day. And it wasn't until years later that I realized it was something that needed to break. It was the facade that my family had developed, that we were a perfect family and that we had no problems. And if we had no problems, then there was nothing that needed to be talked about. And I was reminded so much in Danny's talk this morning about the Japanese pottery, when it breaks and how it's recreated, put back together with gold. And that's what our family needed. We needed to be broken so that we could be reconstructed into our truest beauty. And so for any of you who are in that broken stage, it's not easy. That may be the place where you need to be right now, or where your families need to be. And I just honor you in that space, as difficult as it is. My family at the time was moderately religious, and it's strange to say, but I was really grateful for that in many ways. I have so many friends. I helped to moderate an unofficial GCN Facebook group for folks our age, and we hear so many stories of rejection, of estrangement, that just break my heart. And I almost feel lucky in some ways that my parents weren't so zealous about their faith that they weren't able to, that they felt like they needed to let go of me. They said that, we love you no matter what. And that was so encouraging for me to hear. At the same time, they were afraid and embarrassed and ashamed. They felt like I needed to be helped in some way. I thought I needed to be helped in some way. The only solution they could find was therapy, reparative therapy to be specific, which is, if you're not familiar, helping to change our same-sex attractions. And so I did reparative therapy on and off for 6 years, which is a pretty long time. I was actually talking with my dad a couple months ago, and we were trying to tally up how much we spent on therapy. I'm not going to tell you the exact number, but I'm just going to say that I could have gotten a second college degree.
Or we could have a down payment for a house.
Or we could have a house in Portland right now. So it was a tough time. A lot of therapy, some of the theories behind it talk about how things that parents have done wrong and what they did or didn't do for the child growing up. And so I understandably had a lot of anger for my parents at that time. And I had a lot of anger at myself too, for being unable to fix myself. No matter how hard I tried, my attractions just weren't changing. And so I just was so frustrated with myself too, angry at them, angry at myself. And we didn't really know how to talk about it. We just developed this unspoken policy of silence. And we just swept everything underneath the rug. And the one thing we learned is that just because you sweep something under the rug, it doesn't go away. It just sits there quietly hidden, waiting to come back at some time. And it eventually did. So don't sweep things under the rug. Have those hard talks. They're not easy, but have them. Your child needs you to have them. It wasn't all bad. I needed therapy at the time, just like any kind of therapy. I needed a chance to just talk to someone about my feelings and what was going on, and I'd never been able to have that opportunity. The other great thing about it is it was really my first introduction to a personal relationship with God and with Jesus. in therapy, I started asking myself questions. It sent me on a quest for truth. Why am I doing this? Who am I doing it for? If I'm doing it for God, why? What does He want from me? Who does He want me to be? These questions helped lead me to an introduction to God. But it was only an introduction. And it's really been over the next 2 decades that I've come to get to know Him intimately and have a relationship with Him. That season of my life was really just a season of limbo. I was living a very fragmented life. I had gay friends in one corner, Christian friends in the other, my parents way off on the sidelines. I was not an integrated person. I was a disintegrated person. And it was a very hard place to be. And I lived in that place for many, many years.
So my story is a little bit different. For starters, my family was even less religious than David's. Faith and church just weren't part of my upbringing. Like I mentioned in the introduction, by 19th I was an atheist, and I wasn't angry at the church. I didn't have any bones to pick with religion because religion hadn't hurt me. It just wasn't part of my life. I did come to Christ later during that year, somewhere between New York and Alabama, and I'm happy to share that some other time. But suffice it to say, when I came out at 20, I didn't have any of that pressure. So for me, the self-acceptance part was easy. I didn't feel any shame. I didn't feel like there was anything broken about me. I knew, however, that my parents were not going to be happy. Not because of their religious background, but more just a social aspect of it. They were embarrassed. I come from a Latin American family, and just appearances are very important, right? So my parents weren't so much upset by me being gay, but by me being out. And they were also, worried about my health. This was the late 90s. So, of course, the brunt of the AIDS epidemic was still very, very fresh in everyone's memory. Growing up, I only knew of one family friend who was gay, and he had died of AIDS just a few years before I came out. And it was this thing where, no one ever really talked about him being gay or even, his cause of death, but everyone knew, right? He was this really nice, great guy that everyone liked, but he had this one glaring difference, and that difference had led to his death. So my parents didn't want any of their children to be different in any way, or even appear to be different. So they wanted me to just stay in the closet. I love my parents, but I have to say they even gave me some advice that I wouldn't give my kids. One of the things I heard was, well, lots of married men have affairs. If you are, sleeping with, if you, cheat with other women or with men, no one has to know. So why don't you just get married to a woman, and then do what you need to. And I was only 20, but even then, that sounded like a really awful.
Like the worst chicken soup for the soul.
So I decided at that point, yes, listen to your parents, but maybe not always. So I didn't listen to that one particular advice.
Thank you.
I, moved away. I settled on the East Coast in New York City, thousands of miles away from my parents. And that distance became really not just geographical, but emotional, right? I came out and I was out at work, at school, my friends. I was living a fully integrated life. The only people I couldn't talk about any of this with were my parents. They would come visit sometimes, and they wouldn't even meet any of my friends. I think they were afraid of meeting any of my friends, even if they were straight, because even they knew that I was gay, right? We would talk on the phone, and we would just talk about the weather and politics. And if we started getting towards any kind of like more or less personal territory, like the conversation would end because it was just too scary. And this was also, again, not to keep dating ourselves, but before Facebook. So, there was really no window into my life. I was very much out of sight, out of mind. And that allowed them to just create these images of me that had nothing to do with the reality, right? Like, when they interacted with me, they treated me as if I was just this, young man obsessed with work and school who had no life, right? Like I was basically, I think,
Like a fiction to make them feel better.
yeah, just a hermit who had no social life. I think in their dark moments, they probably imagined much worse things. I think the reason they never met any of my friends was because they probably thought all my friends were these debaucherous libertines, and we were doing who knows what. And
Wild orgy.
yeah, I mean, I don't know, that I don't know what was going through their minds. And that was the most frustrating part for me. Because really, I was just a 20-something-year-old guy finding myself, finding my place in the world. I had a social life, I had friends, but I was also responsible. I held on to the values that I learned growing up. I've never been much of a drinker, I've never smoked, I didn't have any vice, yeah. But that just image, whatever it was that they were creating, that was the most frustrating part. And I want to say, I think this is something that some of you may even relate to when you see how your extended family might see your child, right? And I don't know, I just want to, I want to take a moment to just mention that and honor it and say, when you see your extended family, older relatives, friends, not engage with your LGBT child, all those frustrations that you feel, that anger maybe even that you feel at, the false images that they are creating about your child, they are seen, you're not alone. They are seen not only by the people in this room, they are seen by God, who created your child lovingly, who loves your child more than you love your child, who loves you more than you yourselves can imagine. And I didn't have God. Well, in hindsight, I see that I had him. I didn't know he was there when I was going through that at that age. But you know you have God, and you can just rely on him, and trust that he sees you and he sees your child.
So, our road to acceptance with our parents, once we started dating, it was entered a whole new phase, excitement and fun. So, again, we have kind of two different stories and different reactions from our parents. And one becomes a story of gradual acceptance, and one not so much. And so we'll tell you a little bit about both of them. So after my 15 years, 6 years of therapy, then I was in men's healing groups for another almost 10 years. So I was doing we did a lot of talking, but not a lot of healing. And so I was a long time on that circuit. And so during that time, my parents were not seeing the real me. And in fact, I was not seeing the real me. I was almost like a zombie version of myself going through life. And it did not feel sustainable. My feelings had not changed. And I had come to a place in my life where I felt like celibacy was the only option. For many of you in your churches, you may discover that that is the church stance these days. Many churches will actually recognize gay people, LGBTQ people, and celibacy is the option that they rely on, and celibacy is the only option. And again, like what I mentioned beforehand, there are going to be LGBTQ people, Christians in particular, who feel called to celibacy, and we think that is wonderful and beautiful, and we have friends who are side B, as we say in the GCN community, and we honor that. I never felt called to celibacy, and the Bible frames celibacy as a calling, not as a punishment, and not as a solution to a problem. It's a gift, and I never felt gifted with that. Lucky for you. And so given time, I felt the voice of Spirit talking to me, telling me that the door to relationship was open to me, but I had to step through it. I had to make that step. And that was terrifying to me. I sat in that space for another few years, terrified of what that would mean, of what stepping into relationship would look like. That to me was even more challenging and more terrifying than living a celibate life, because of what that would bring upon me, of what I would have to deal with friends and family, and especially church community. I didn't want it. I really didn't want it, as strange as that sounds. And yet that voice kept nagging at my heart. And it's probably the only time in my life that I feel like I've gotten such a clear, direct message from Spirit. I'm not the type of person who really ever gets that. And it just kept beating and beating against me. And then I met Constantino. And everything fell into place. Happily ever after.
Not that quickly.
Not that quickly, no. Spirit had been working at my heart for years, and when I met him, I felt this is the person who I want to step through that door for. It wasn't easy. He spent a long time sitting outside my walls of shame and self-doubt and theological uncertainty. These walls were 10 feet wide and 100 stories high. And I credit him for being patient and loving, and those walls would briefly come down and we'd get little glimpses of each other, and they'd go back up, and over time the walls come down more often, and they're down for longer periods of time. But it was honestly pretty rough going when we first started dating.
He was hard.
So I told my parents that we were dating. And it was not easy for them. Those 15 years, all that stuff all swept under the rug that I mentioned, well, I pulled it up and I pointed at it, and it was still there. And my parents hadn't done a lot of the work that I had been doing over all those years, because we had stuffed it all down, because we hadn't had those talks. And so even though I told them way back when I was 19, it was almost like I was just coming out to them for the first time. And so it was difficult. And they're wonderful people and very gracious and hospitable. So, when they got to know him and met him in person, they came to really love and admire and respect him. Because who wouldn't? I mean, come on, look at this guy. But it still wasn't easy. I never want to thrust change and growth upon someone, but in this situation, I had to. For me to be able to come out and live authentically and date someone, it was forcing my parents to come out, and it brought on a lot of difficult questions from their friends and their church community. And I love the way I was standing in line for lunch with Ruth today, and she mentioned, she said, as gay people, we are processing all this stuff for years and years, and finally it gets to be too much, we can't take it, and we just kind of vomit it all up to our parents. And that's so true, I could just relate to so much of that. And then they have all that to deal with, and they start then going on their own journey. And we've done all that processing, we'd be like, okay, come on, let's go, But they need that time, and you need that time. And we don't always get that, because we finally come to a place where, we work through a lot of stuff, and you need to start your journey. And whenever we talk to our friends going through this, trying to work on their parents, we just try to impress upon them patience, 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 and loving relationship, giving parents the time that they need, and having empathy for parents where they're at in the process. After a year of dating, we dated for a year. We both moved up to Portland together. We lived separate apartments, but we moved up to Portland to be together. He got a job up there, moved, and I moved up about a month or two later. And after a year's time, we got engaged. And it was beautiful. Tino planned a beautiful weekend in the middle of the Oregon forest in a fire lookout tower, and it was amazing. And we were excited to share this with friends and family. So we got back from that weekend, and I called my parents up, told them good news, and they were shocked. I mean, shocked. I don't know what they thought was gonna happen after a year of dating and then moving to a city together. And my mom said, "Oh, that's nice." And my dad said, "Well, it sounds like you're starting to get serious." Yeah, it's as serious as it gets. There was no congratulations in the conversation. And
Congratulations.
So, thank you. Thank you. And so I got off the phone, and I'm not a big crier, but I had a full-on ugly cry session then. And they called back later and amended themselves. My mom did congratulate us. We went home for Christmas a month later. We didn't really talk about it again, just that policy, that way of interacting. And everything was good, very pleasant but superficial. And the last night we were there, it's like we needed to have this talk because this would be the last time that we would see them before the wedding. So we sat them down and we're like, we would love you to be at our wedding. It would be so meaningful to us. However, we don't want to force you. We don't want you to come if you can't celebrate with us. My mom and my sister automatically said that they would come. My dad wasn't so sure. He was still embarrassed. He's Arabic. It's still very cultural for him. He just has had a hard time wrapping his head around two men getting married. So we said to him, we love you no matter what. This is not going to affect our relationship. We're still going to be in relationship together with you no matter what you choose.
I'll say, throughout this, I didn't feel rejected, and they've been really the most amazing in-laws, and the whole time I felt very included by them, and so we felt that, so we returned that grace.
Yeah, and I think it was that choice to try and give him space and extend him that grace that gave him some time to process. And so about a month before the wedding, he did choose to come. And I'll be honest, it was not entirely comfortable, but it was so wonderful.
He helped set up.
He helped set up. He did all the dad things that you do. He watched the wedding site for 3 hours while we went and changed, and all those awesome dad things. And it was so
walked
meaningful.
down the aisle when we made them.
He was the one we made him process. He loved that. But it was, it's a memory that we'll have forever. We're so glad. And so, the lesson I learned is if When you can choose to love first, the details can be worked out later. Love first. The thing is, we were able to do that on both ends, and that's what you need. You have to both be willing to love first, and that's how we made it work. With Tino's situation, that became more of a challenge, and he's going to talk about that experience.
Yeah, so you won't be surprised to know that my story is different. My parents and I had already grown pretty distant by the time all of this was happening. It had been 15 plus years of trying to be kind of like in this relationship with them and just hitting walls, just hitting the we're gonna stay at the shallow, let's talk about politics and weather level. So, but still, the day after we got engaged, the first people I told were my parents and my siblings. I sent them a Facebook message, partly because you can see when they've seen it. So, yeah. And two of my sisters, my brother, my niece, nephews wrote back immediately. Congratulations, we're happy for you. My parents didn't say anything. They got the message, and a week later, I was like, they still hadn't said anything. I talked to my sister. I was like, can you check to see if maybe the dog checked the message? And that's it. And no, my parents had gotten the message. They knew. So 2 weeks after that, it was my dad's birthday. So I knew I had to call. I talk to my parents 2 or 3 times a year on each other's birthdays. We text on Mother's Day, Father's Day, Christmas. But it was my dad's birthday, so it was one of those days when you have to call. And I was so nervous. So it was the first time we were going to talk. I don't think I got much sleep the night before. So I called, and I'll just say the call was anticlimactic. It was a perfectly fine, pleasant call. We talked about the elections. My mom had some story about a distant cousin who I kind of remember. And that was that. I think after that I cried more than I had cried in years. I just felt erased. It felt like, like I knew that we were strangers, right? Like I knew that that they didn't really know me, but just pretending that nothing significant was happening in my life after I had gotten engaged made me feel like I wasn't even worth getting to know. Honestly, like if they had yelled at me and said, "Don't do this," like that would have been better. If they had said, "We'll never talk to you again if you do this. We'll reject you," that would have been better. I've learned that rejection, when you think about it, it's kind of like a subverted form of relationship, right? It's like you have a connection even if it's based on division, right? I didn't have that. And part of what makes this hard is that my parents were always great parents. And I have to say this because my biggest fear in sharing this is that it's gonna make them sound like awful people, which they're not. They are good people. They are honorable. And they love me. I have never doubted that my parents love me. I know that they are as sad about the state of our relationship as I am. I'm never going to minimize their sadness. It would be easy, it would be so much easier to just demonize them, but I can't. They are really good people. They've given what they can, and what they can is this this level this level of relationship. And the thing is, though, even though I know they love me, I think all of us, yeah, we want to be loved, but most of all, we want to be known. Right? And for that, I think the reason I keep saying thank you, guys, for being here is that the fact that you are here tells me that you not only love your children, you want to know them. And no matter what your convictions are, no matter where you are, you being here is proof that you want to understand your children. You want to know them. You want to be in a relationship with them, in authentic relationship with a real them. You don't want to create images in your head of who your child is. You want to know who your child really is. And for that, thank you. The years of estrangement from my parents left me feeling like a person with no kin, right? We called our blog Modern Kinship because we think marriage is I think the essence of marriage is kinship, right? It's that having someone who is yours and to whom you belong. You can get kinship through marriage, or you can get it through birth and through growing up. I lost kinship with the people who brought me up. I spent 10 Christmases alone before I met David. So I was used to, the first Christmas I spent with David's family was kind of like, I was incorporating all of my solo Christmas traditions, because over the course of 10 years, you create your own traditions. But I was alone in a way that went beyond loneliness. It was just, I had no one. I didn't have anyone to whom I belonged. And that's the one thing that marriage has done. It has restored that kinship. I am David's, and he is mine. And his family is my family now. Over Mother's Day, his mom actually told me, she said that if I feel comfortable, I can call her mom. And it just warmed both of our hearts so much, His dad, he's always giving me advice about work, and he gives me lots of fatherly advice. I have kin again. And that, in a surprising way, I feel is actually making my relationship with my parents better now. Because I no longer need to ask of them something that they can't give. And I think we all sense it, My mom actually sent us a letter and a gift for the wedding. She sent it with my sister. Her birthday a couple months ago, I put her on speakerphone and made David say happy birthday to her. And it was
super awkward.
It was fantastically awkward. It was, and yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, but that's one beautiful kind of side effect of marriage. Feeling like I have kin again has strengthened me to, even improve my relationship with my parents.
So what does life look like for us now, both in our relationship with our parents and just between each other? We want to talk a little bit just what our marriage looks like. And there'll be questions afterward too, so a chance for questions if you have any, so think about that. Like Tino mentioned, my parents have come a long way, especially just in this past year. My dad's, a little bit by bit. My mom is complete 180. And a lot of that has been her getting involved in community like this, in getting involved in some of the moms groups on Facebook, in getting involved in Susan Cottrell's wonderful Free Hearts group, in getting to know other moms and wonderful people like Abby Cortez. That community has just been a catalyst for her. And the problem, I think my dad has is that he doesn't engage in those things and he isolates, and he can't see that there are other people struggling through this, and so it's hard for him to do that work. So I'm so grateful for groups like this. My mom will just call me out. She'll be like, "Did you read this story? The moms are going wild about this, blah, 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 blah. Franklin Graham." Mom, chill out. I love her passion, but she's like, tone it down. So what does same-sex marriage look like? Some of you may not even know a same-sex married couple, except for us. You know us now. But it's still so rare in so many communities, especially Christian same-sex couples. There are just so few examples out there. When we were about to get married, my dad said, he said, it hurts me because you're setting yourself up for a difficult life. And in a lot of ways, there was truth in that. Some truth, partial truth. There are...
You have met me.
Yeah. There are external difficulties, of course, depending on where you live. Your child may face bigotry and homophobia, sometimes within your very own family. Those are very real, tangible challenges, external challenges, and difficulties. We've been lucky. My family, for the most part, has been very accepting, my extended family. We live in Portland, which is a very easy place for us to live. Really, one of our biggest external challenges is just from our blog. We get loads of lovely hate mail from that. And I was just gonna mention it and move on. And I'm like, because they're wild, we really haven't gotten any hate mail recently. And then, sure enough, 2 days ago, we got a lovely hate mail. And so I just had to read it because it takes the power away. So this guy said, quote, "Paul calls this lustful sexual gratification of homosexuals and lesbians, which is against the natural use, burning in lust, all caps, and vile affections, all caps, leaving no doubt as to God's assessment of these sexual behaviors, which are also clearly condemned in Leviticus, where they are labeled abominations, and those involved in those sexual sins were to be taken outside the Israelite camp and stoned to death by the order of God himself. By C. R. Lord." Pleasant. So, what do you do with that? You just gotta take it, and it is what it is. I call it character building.
We've each had our own journey, struggling with those verses in the Bible, and we've done a lot of studying it because it's our lives, So it doesn't hurt a lot, I'm confident. I hold Scripture I hold a very high view of Scripture, and I'm confident in God having blessed our marriage. But it's the reminder that some people would stone you.
Yeah.
That's harsh. Right?
Yeah.
So it's not the Scripture that gets to us. I am confident in that, but it's
just the heart where it comes from, I think. So what does life look like for us now? I think for us, it's less the external challenges than the internal challenges. And I think this might be something that a lot of your children may face too, especially if they're of our generation or a little bit younger, especially if they're LGBTQ Christians, that because of all of this, bring a lot of internal baggage to the relationship. I'm bringing all of my shame and self-doubt and theological uncertainty to our relationship. And those things don't just go away. Marriage doesn't cure them. It's something that we still have to continue to work on all the time. And my walls still go up, and we still have to take time to be intentional about bringing them down. And I think if you have a child who has been struggling with his sexuality, especially as it relates to his or her faith, that may be something that they'll always have to work on a little bit in their relationship. You know, the reparative therapy that takes playing in my head don't just go away so easily. It affects our relationship. I think the bigger struggle for me when we first got married, well, you know, right before we got married, were just the theological uncertainties that I had. I'm the type of person who like wants concrete answers. Like I want to just know the answer. And you know, it's impossible to prove that God affirms same-sex marriage, just like it's impossible to prove that God exists. But you know what? That's okay, because inherent in faith is doubt. And that's a lesson that I have needed to learn over and over again. These healing groups that I was a part of for the better part of 10 years, you know, these men, and I count myself among them, were some of the just most miserable, inwardly focused people I had ever met. They had no energy to give outward. Their fists were just grasping so tightly to obedience that their hands had no room for anything else that God might be wanting to give them. In fact, I had a friend from one of those groups say, I'm trying so hard to obey that God can't ask anything more of me. I have nothing else to give. And that was a real aha moment for me, because that is not life-giving to me. That is not a joy of spirit working through someone. And I contrast that to when I started dating Tino. I saw so much fruit in our relationship, not just in how it has grown me, but how our faith has both grown deeper because of each other, how it's affected other people in our lives in the ways that it has challenged them to see God in bigger and more wonderful ways. I know that the fruit of my relationship will never be concrete evidence for anyone to win an argument, but for me, it has been that certainty that I needed that has helped me get past those internal conflicts that have challenged our relationship. Marriage, same-sex marriage, has its benefits in some ways. We have friends who have asked us variations of the question, who's the wife in your marriage? Which is like, what does that mean? What are you asking? And, you know, I think they're asking like, I don't know, like who does the cooking and cleaning and like who like earns the pay? I'm not sure. It's a very like antiquated view of marriage that I think many heterosexual couples don't even prescribe to these days. At the same time, heterosexual couples have greater pressure to fill more traditional roles. There are preset molds for them. We don't have those. We don't have those rules. We have the freedom to make our own rules. And that's actually been really refreshing for us. We've been able to use our own interests and talents and gifts to give and take from the relationship as we see fit. So, you know, Tino will do the dishes and I'll do laundry. We both earn a little bit of money for the family. And it's been really freeing not to have cultural norms thrown upon us. We haven't had to fit ourselves into a mold. We've been able to mold relationship to us. And that's been, helped us create, I think, a really like beautiful, wonderful, unique relationship. And I really have, I think, treasured that most. As time goes by, I feel less like a gay married couple and just like a married couple. And that has been so wonderful and so encouraging. So my dad's worry that we were setting ourselves up for a harder life, yeah, there was some truth in that. But we were also setting ourselves up for the most rewarding relationship of our life. It has made us stronger, more empathetic, more committed to God. And had I not chosen that harder life, I would be missing out on the love of my life.
It's gonna make me blush. A story comes to mind actually on the, that notion of like who's the wife or the roles. The questions come even from progressive. We have a good friend of ours from church. She's a lawyer, and I'm pretty sure she makes more money than her husband. And when we were engaged, she actually asked us, well, but who's gonna make the final decision? And we're like, what?
Someone gets to do that?
Yeah. And then she said, well, yeah. So she said, well, because in our marriage, apparently, when they got married, like in premarital counseling, they established that if you hit an impasse where, which every couple is gonna have those conflicts where you fully disagree, still the tiebreaker was gonna be the husband, right? And yeah, so we,
And it works beautifully for me.
Yeah. So those sorts of things, we just, of course it's me who makes the final decision. But it wasn't,
He thinks,
Okay, now you sound like a
I want to talk about how marriage has changed me, follow the thread. I've said it's helped me to even have a better relationship with my parents, but also how has it just changed me, and what have I learned from marriage, even about what it means to be the body of Christ and what it means to be church. But the biggest outward change was actually in my name, right? I took David's name when we got married. We knew we were going to share a name because we like the cohesion that it brings to a family, right? We like the message that it sends that we are a family unit. We belong to each other. What we didn't, decide by default was who was gonna take whose name, if we were gonna hyphenate, if we were gonna, mix our names. My bachelor name is Duran, so
Diaz Duran.
Yeah, Duran. And we thought, Caleb, Duran, Khan, and maybe name our son Genghis. None of those work. We just decided, for us, what made more sense was for me to take David's name, and that has been an adjustment, right? Like, it's not unusual for someone to change their name when they get married. It's not usually a guy. And I don't want to minimize the feelings that women. Since then, I've talked to many of my married female friends who've changed their names and kind of like related. And I don't want to minimize the feelings of change that happen. But in one way or another, women grow up, knowing that that's a possibility, right? That if you get married, you might, change it. As a guy, you never think about it. You never think your name is going to change, right? So it's taken me a while to adjust, but it fits. And the thing is, for us, or for me, changing my name wasn't about leaving my past behind. It was about cleaving, right? It was about becoming this family unit. We want to have children someday, and we, want to share. We want them to share their names with both of us, right? We want there to be no question that, just like I am David's and he is mine, that our children belong to both of us, and we both belong to them. Now, my bachelor name, I love it. I mean, it's always going to be a part of me. But it's like that old jersey that it no longer fits, but you keep it around and you pull it out and look at it because it holds some of the best memories that you'll ever have. And the memories that you'll tell your children and your grandchildren. And so that was a change. It wasn't a big one. Like I said, once we made the decision, I adjusted clearly. But that was the biggest change. And some of you, when your children get married, they might be changing their name. Those of you who have sons, your son might change, his name. And partly voice that because I know that is a transition. I think, it was for my parents, it was even for his parents, right? And, it's part of the journey. Inwardly though, it's where I think the biggest change has come for me. David wrote on our blog, he was writing about the day we went to get our marriage license, and I'm gonna quote because I think he wrote this. He said, "It took me a moment to notice Constantino next to me, whose feet were tapping furiously in anticipation. His eyes held equal parts fear and excitement, like a kid standing at the edge of a springboard on a high dive. It's feeling real now," Constantino said. His expression was conflicted, as if he wasn't sure if he liked that or not. And that's true, actually. I wouldn't say I got cold feet, but they got, lukewarm. I got nervous. And then, whatever, they called our number, we walk up to the clerk, and David just, clamped his hand around my neck. And he leaned in and said, "If you try to run, I will trip you." And you know what? At that, I exhaled. And I'll never forget his hand on my neck. It felt like peace. It felt like an anchor. It was this sense that I have someone, that I won't drift away, that no matter what storms life may bring, I am at port. I'm safe. And that sense of just stability, I think, has helped me grow in a way that I never expected. It has allowed me to step into this scary call to ministry of sorts and even be here with GCN. It's changed my life. It's helped me be more aware of the promises I've made and of keeping them. I think that the beautiful thing about Christian marriage is that it's a covenant, that it's not only between two people, it's between three, right? The couple and God. We chose a traditional liturgy for our marriage, our wedding, because it unambiguously frames the covenant of marriage as a covenant between three parties. Before we promised anything to each other, we each stood up on our own and made individual promises to God to care for the other, to live in covenant and faithfulness with the other person until, till death do us part. And that aspect of the covenant with God is what's made me, I feel, weather even challenging times, right? Like those of you who are married will understand that all couples are in a constant ebb and flow, right? And during those days or weeks, or when we, grow distant, times when we argue, days when love seems to fade, I turn to God. And I remember the promise I made to God to,
Stick with me.
to be stuck with me. It has softened my heart, and it has increased my reliance in God. And that's not to say that I don't feel God's presence when we're in sync and when my heart just bursts with love for Him. Of course I feel God's presence then too. But I wasn't expecting to learn so much reliance on God from marriage. And when I say that, that's taught me something about what it means to be the body of Christ, what it means to be church. What I've learned from that is that, in marriage, you won't always agree. And there won't be one person who will make the final decision. And the same is true of church and communion. We won't always agree. But during those times, when there's different convictions, we can humble ourselves through God and just be gentle, be kind, even in our disagreements. We have someone to whom we can confess our sins and ask for forgiveness. And that makes it possible to confess our sins to each other and ask forgiveness of each other. And I've come to see that as a picture of church. So, again, I lost my train of thought. It was towards the end. See, this is why I don't do public speaking. So how about this can be marriage exercise, or you just finished for me, right?
You are beautiful, and I love you. That's it. If anyone has any questions, we'll be happy to take questions.